बैंकर्स को 10 करोड़ किस बात के मिलते हैं, क्या करते हैं वो जो 10 करोड़ मिलते हैं? हुकूमत को लेंड करते हैं, कुछ भी नहीं करते, 10-15 करोड़ रुपए मिल जाते हैं क्या? ये आपसे पहला मेरा सवाल होगा कि ये क्या प्रॉब्लम है हमारा, इसको हम कैसे हैंडल करें?
What is the role of the financial system? Why do we have a financial system? So I just alluded to, I went to an economy in Africa where the banking system had collapsed. People really couldn't save. They were saving under the mattresses, and no investment going on. There's mayhem around there, and you know, there are it impedes trade, barter. It really disrupts a lot of things in the overall economy of a country.
हमारी कोई जो एकेडेमिया है, जो बेचारी मरी हुई एकेडेमिया है, उसकी कोई बात सुन ले। खलील साहब वो कोई बात नहीं सुनता यहाँ। तो अनफॉर्चुनेटली बजट जैसे कल सुना हवा में बन गया। बजट में एक ऑर्डरली अलाउंस भी है, बजट में एक परमानेंट हैंडलर अलाउंस भी है। जो समझ नहीं आती कि ये लॉर्ड मकौले के जमाने के मेरा ख्याल घोड़े का भी अलाउंस कोई मिलता है, क्योंकि घोड़े पे भी लोग ट्रैवल करते हैं, तो ये भी है। तो ये हमारी इकोनॉमी की हालत है।
Since privatization, there has actually not been much of investment, or hardly any investment by the state, and in fact, wisely, the state bank and the government have worked on putting some of their resources and minds in terms of developing the financial architecture or the financial infrastructure of the country.
मुझे समझ नहीं आ रही कि इन बैंकों के इतने पैसे क्यों बन रहे हैं। इनको हम अगर खत्म कर दें, दोबारा नेशनलाइज कर दें, तो कौम को कोई नुकसान होगा।
If you look at the figures in the table that I put up there, it has been higher and it can go up. It is dependent on private sector activity and how you spur the private sector and how you also encourage banks.
ये जी वेबिनार जैसे कि आप सबको पता है, हम हर रोज हर हफ्ते में 2-3 दफा करते हैं, डिलिबरेटली करते हैं, because we want to elevate the dialogue in Pakistan. पाकिस्तान में अनफॉर्चुनेटली देयर इज नो डायलॉग इन इकोनॉमिक पॉलिसी। बजट आता है तो 1-2 दिन के लिए कामरान खान साहब या वो अपना क्या नाम है हामिद मीर साहब या ये लोग 1-2 रैंडमली बंदे इकट्ठे कर लेते हैं। किसी को अगर कोई मजदूर मिल जाए उसको इकोनॉमिस्ट कह देते हैं। 2-4 बैंकर्स तो मिल ही जाते हैं, बैंकर्स तो दानों के साथ आते हैं, बट ये है कि बैंकर्स को पैसे बड़े मिलते हैं। खलील साहब ये आपको एक्सप्लेन करना पड़ेगा, बैंकर्स को 10 करोड़ किस बात के मिलते हैं, क्या करते हैं वो जो 10 करोड़ मिलते हैं? हुकूमत को लेंड करते हैं, कुछ भी नहीं करते, 10-15 करोड़ रुपए मिल जाते हैं क्या? ये आपसे पहला मेरा सवाल होगा कि ये क्या प्रॉब्लम है हमारा, इसको हम कैसे हैंडल करें? अच्छा, नंबर 2 ये है कि जी हम कोशिश करते हैं कि हमारी कोई जो एकेडेमिया है, जो बेचारी मरी हुई एकेडेमिया है, उसकी कोई बात सुन ले। खलील साहब वो कोई बात नहीं सुनता यहाँ। तो अनफॉर्चुनेटली बजट जैसे कल सुना हवा में बन गया। बजट में एक ऑर्डरली अलाउंस भी है, बजट में एक परमानेंट हैंडलर अलाउंस भी है। जो समझ नहीं आती कि ये लॉर्ड मकौले के जमाने के मेरा ख्याल घोड़े का भी अलाउंस कोई मिलता है, क्योंकि घोड़े पे भी लोग ट्रैवल करते हैं, तो ये भी है। तो ये हमारी इकोनॉमी की हालत है। इसलिए हमने कोशिश की है कि आज खलील अहमद साहब को बुलाया। खलील अहमद साहब बहुत अच्छे आदमी है, बड़े वेल नोन आदमी है, फाइनेंशियल सर्विसेज ऑफ पाकिस्तान के इन्होंने बहुत काम किया, IFC के साथ काम करते थे। तो इन्होंने तकरीबन सारे आपके जो प्रोजेक्ट्स हैं, खासतौर पे बाबर अली के, IFC तो आपको पता है ना बाबर अली की चहेती है, तो जितना बाबर अली का काम किया इन्होंने किया। इनसे पूछ लें बाबर अली के क्या पैसे इन्होंने बनवाए हैं। और वैसे भी स्टॉक मार्केट इन्होंने काम किया, स्टॉक मार्केट जो हालत है इनसे पूछेंगे। तो खलील साहब जैसे मैंने कहा IFC में 30 साल लगा चुके हैं, और बाकी अब माशाल्लाह हबीब बैंक के बोर्ड पे भी है, ये भी बड़ा अच्छा ऑनर है हमारा। एकेडमिक खलील साहब एक और चीज प्लीज नोट कर लें, कभी आज तक कोई एकेडमिक किसी बोर्ड पे नहीं लगा, तो ये भी एक बड़ी अजीब इंटरेस्टिंग बात है। बाकी मुल्कों में तो होता है पर यहाँ नहीं होता। ये बहुत सारे आपको सवाल मैं छोड़ रहा हूँ। तो पाकिस्तान के सिचुएशन जो है बड़े ब्रीफली मैंने आपको बता दी। अब खलील साहब बताएंगे enhancing the delivery of financial services in Pakistan। खलील साहब बहुत अहम टॉपिक है और मैं बहुत खुश हूँ। I really wanted to have a session on this and I'm glad I got hold of you। बड़ी मिन्नतें करके इनको बुलाया है इसीलिए कि प्लीज बताइए, हमारी फाइनेंशियल मार्केट्स तो बिल्कुल मरी हुई हैं। हमारे पास 10-15 बैंक्स हैं जो सिर्फ हुकूमत को लेंड करते हैं, और उसके लिए माशाल्लाह हर जो बंदा है वहाँ बैंक में वो 10 करोड़ बना रहा है, हर बोर्ड मेंबर करोड़ रुपया बना रहा है। मुझे समझ नहीं आ रही कि इन बैंकों के इतने पैसे क्यों बन रहे हैं। इनको हम अगर खत्म कर दें, दोबारा नेशनलाइज कर दें, तो कौम को कोई नुकसान होगा। तो ये बहुत सारे सवाल आपके लिए छोड़ो। खलील साहब, ओवर टू यू, डू टेल अस how can we improve the financial services in Pakistan? Over to you, Khaleel sir.
Nadeem, thank you very much for that introduction, and appreciate the invitation. I want to thank PIDE. I want to thank you for having me over. I want to temper down the expectations. I've certainly going to highlight a few points and touch upon some of the issues that you've raised. Are banks playing their role in the economy, and what more can we do? A few caveats, please. I want to first say I'm not addressing this as a representative of HPL. This is only, or of any other institution. I'm a retiree of IFC. This is something from my heart, and these are my thoughts, because the Pakistani financial sector has come a long way, but it has a long way to go. And that is basically the gist of. Will appreciate taking questions. I would actually like to take questions. So you may want to interrupt me, or I don't know how these sessions are. Maybe at the end we could take a bunch of questions and take it from there. The third caveat I wanted to add is that I have known Nadeem Haque for over 30 years, and I have a great regard for him. I have not met anyone who thinks outside the box like Nadeem, and I think it's a great ability. He's always impressed me, and not only with his analytics, but his thoughts. I mean, he's just not constrained with the conventional views, and that's what I thoroughly enjoy about Nadeem. And of course, he's put me into a box. I'm not going to answer all the questions he's raised, certainly about bankers' pay, etc. They get paid for what they do, and this is something that's controlled by the central bank. And I too certainly agree that academia needs to be have a greater prominence in this whole financial sector, financial institutions, etc. And I'd be very happy to work with people in PIDE who would like to further pursue this subject and to be able to write things on this. And this is where we need to lobby and work with the central bank and financial institutions and with the federal government. Now, I have just shared a update of a presentation. I don't know whether people are in the hall or linked through the web, and I hope you can see it. And let me talk to some of the slides, but I do have a tendency to go off the chart. And please, will someone stop me if there's a question, or if there is, if I'm running over the time. Okay. Let me just, I'm going to be talking about several areas. I've noted in the content section, the next page, please. Mansoor Saab, the next page, yeah. In no great order, because you'll see in the presentation, I've got a few sectors that I've actually covered with some data. In some areas, data was lacking, but I've quoted certain articles. But I will share my thoughts about how we can progress and what's been done, and why these sectors are important. Please note the caveat, I'm not speaking as a representative of any bank or institution, retiree IFC, and I have worked not only in IFC, but across the world in different economies, at different stages in the world. And I've even worked in a country where the basic, one of my first assignments was in a country where the basic commercial banking sector had collapsed. There was just no institution where people could save. So we had to really go there and reconstruct it. This was an African country. It was very early in my career, and gave me a very interesting perspective on why banks are important in an economy. So we talk about the financial system. Jotted a few points about it. Next slide, please. What is the role of the financial system? Why do we have a financial system? So I just alluded to, I went to an economy in Africa where the banking system had collapsed. People really couldn't save. They were saving under the mattresses, and no investment going on. There was mayhem around there. And And you know, there are it impedes trade, barter. It really disrupts a lot of things in the overall economy of a country. So some of these statements, I mean, they will reflect my biases. I've spent a lifetime in the World Bank Group, and you know, these are basically the reason why we have a financial system underpins economic growth and development, and basically by creating jobs, accelerating economic growth, it helps job growth, reduces poverty alleviation, and it's very critical for financial stability. So what is financial stability? Financial stability is basically, you know, it helps create a situation where people are able to borrow and operate and sell with ease, where there is some price stability, and where there is you know, confidence in the system, so that people are able to go and deposit money and not worry about tomorrow that money having eroded value, or that money not being able to purchase anything, and gives people peace of mind. Stability is something is important because it gives people the confidence to invest and save, helps create a robust banking system. If there isn't stability, people will withdraw their money and try and convert it into gold or some other species, and hold on to some asset or value. And of course, it also helps you in the external relationships in terms of payments across the borders, etc. Now, I've also put in an expression, access to finance, and we will go to that subject later on. I just thought I'd address some of this. It improves the overall welfare, it enables people to thrive, but basically, it, you know, if you have a financial system and that is confined to just the very rich, the people who have the resources, who earn the resources, who have the surpluses, it makes them richer. The whole idea of a financial system, and a good and efficient financial system, as I've said right at the top, is to allocate resources and to take it from where there are surpluses, and to take the risks, and to be able to develop new segments. So that is something that is very current, and access to finance also implies not only for those who are in the lower segments, but also across genders and across various territories. There may be cities or territories within a country that have more money, finances, resources, and which are lacking in another part of the country. And the ability to be able to transmit it, to be able to intermediate that, it is very, very strong. It is very essential. I'm also talking about capital markets, because that really comes in very late. Will be some of my concluding comments. Capital markets help raise money from investors for long term, and they're not just for equity, which is a very long-term instrument and a very unique instrument. Also long-term bonds, which help finance housing, infrastructure, and other capital formation. We will get into that later. So I think I've really talked about it. And just one thing that I will add is it's important, because benefits produced by financial intermediation and markets are not being spread widely. That's why financial inclusion is important. It's not being spread widely throughout the population across economic centers. And this will impact growth, income distribution, poverty levels. And also, as I mentioned earlier, we do not want to have concentration in relatively few individuals for sector, which is something that which has been seen in our economy in the last few years. Thank you for getting to this slide. This is the slide that I was referring to. Let's go to the next one, which is the components of a financial system. I'm talking very generically, and then we'll go to Pakistan. So the next slide, Mansoor sir, if you're. This is sort of a broad, thing here, a broad statement here. What really comprises a financial system, and people will give you different answers. The shorter ones and longer ones, there'll be many more in the laundry list. This is what I feel is quite critical. And I put laws and regulations as a number one item there. You'll find some presentations have that literally as an appendage. I think that's very critical. Unless you open up segments and unless this is an activity, financial sector, which happens with or without government. If you don't have regulations, you still have people who have surpluses who will lend. There's always some lending and borrowing, and there is exchange going on in the economy. What laws and regulations do is to regulate it, try and give comfort to the general public that their money will be safe, and create the structure of institutions, the economy, and the financial sector. So just to give you an example, we have the State Bank Act, which creates a central bank. We have lots of laws and regulations that impact our financial system. We have the Bills and Exchanges Act. We have the Contract Acts. So the whole body of civil law, which impacts economic affairs and economic activities, is part of the laws and regulation. But specialized regulations for financial sector is important because it helps channel resources, gives safety, comfort of mind to investors and institutions, and gives a framework. You need a framework to be able to intermediate. One of the very key things about the laws and regulations is also recovery. If you have weak recovery laws, weak data, you will find that capacity to intermediate will be limited. So that's critical. I put it as number one, and one can go and talk a lot about it, which is not the subject today. Number two, I put regulators, a very critical function. It's not just banking regulators who look after non-bank financial institutions. So in Pakistan, you have the State Bank of Pakistan, which is the primary regulator of banking and a lot of financial activity. But there is also the SECP, the Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan, which is responsible for the non-bank financial institutions and covers and regulates some of them and licenses a variety of segments. There are also various regulators that look into insurance and other industry aspects. Now, what comprises the financial system with the actual institutional structure? Financial institutions. First thing is, what are they? They're banks and non-banks, and I'll describe what are non-banks and get into it. Second is the financial markets. These are not just the stock exchanges, these are the commodities exchanges, bond markets in several countries. We have DCFs, which are listed on the same on the Pakistan Stock Exchange. So different types of markets that specialize. In the United States, you have securities markets that specialize in particular industries. So NASDAQ is very technologically heavy, is the preferred place for tech companies to list. You have smaller markets for in Germany and in Europe and in the UK for smaller companies. So, and the creation of such markets is generally governed by regulators and regulation, and it is there to facilitate trade and exchange of financial instruments. We have a great commodities market in the United States based out of Chicago. And the reason it is in Chicago is because that was the hub of agriculture and produce and commodities in the United States. And therefore, it's really developed and taken the lead, and it had the specialists working for it. Financial instruments, assets and securities, they comprise the financial system. There are different types of securities. In Pakistan, for instance, you have more recently introduced a real estate investment trust. These are vehicles that are floated to be able to finance real estate. Abroad, you have many more instruments and securities and different types of securities designed to enable the flow of finance to particular segments which are underserved, or where there's demand, or where there is the potential for new growth. I've listed financial services. It's close to my heart. When I came back to Pakistan after studying in the UK, and I helped set up the first financial services outfit in Pakistan, which is with NBFC. That institution, like some other great institutions in the country, is now finished, and it's gone. Great institution. It sank because of management, but what I helped introduce out there were the financial services. And I went to the management there, and I said, "You're great at financing bricks and mortars and providing long-term loans, but it's not just loans. You need to also help companies grow. You need to finance them, and you need to help focus on financial markets. Unless you have financial markets and intermediation going on in the country, you won't be doing your job of development finance, as NBFC was mandated to." And financial services today in Pakistan have grown in the last few years, and I've seen an explosion with a number of companies providing different services. And you may be familiar with your friendly broker and your investment banker and so on. List money and stability is another item there, because at the end of the day, the money is your primary means of exchange, and how the regulator controls and shall we say, basically regulates the growth of money in accordance with a plan or policy impacts many things. You do not want runaway inflation. You also want some stability in terms of the government finances, and you want an equilibrium. You want a balance between the private sector and what it needs and what the public sector needs. So these are crucial elements, I believe, in a financial system. I have put in international financial institutions and linkages. I will not talk a lot about it because INF seems to be on every page, on every newspaper's front page if you open that. But these are institutions, because every economy has linkages without the outside. We export, we import, we remit money. These are the linkages, and for which various institutions have been set up globally to regulate them, to help foster good practices, good conduct, and to promote trade and money flows between countries. Thank you for moving to this page. So in Pakistan, let's go to, I should have actually put the word Pakistani banking industry. Forgive me, I'm in a rush. Where are we in Pakistan? I've explained what the institutional structure is in a more generic form in any economy. But in Pakistan, the biggest part of our financial system is the commercial bank. There are 31 of them. There are 5 public sector banks. And the old banking sector till about 15, 20 years ago, 2005, 2006 was basically in the public sector. It's been privatized, and they've moved in different directions. And I would say overall, they've been strengthened. There are 22 private banks in the country. There are 4 foreign banks. And let me tell you, at this time when these banks were all nationalized, in 2003 and 4, the World Bank, the IMF looked at the financial system and concluded that a lot of the public sector banks were basically broke. their asset classification was very weak, the asset provisioning was non-existent, and they were not playing their function of providing access to finance to the private sector and promoting economic growth. They're basically running at the diktat of whoever owned them. In that case, that was the government. At that stage, the World Bank actually financed a recapitalization of banks. And just to give you an idea, there are people who worked on it, and I did not work on it. I was at the IFC, so it was my colleagues at the World Bank who just one institution needed about $600 million worth of cleanup. Another one had $400 million of a cleanup. So it was a huge cost to the government to just clean up those institutions, recapitalize them, and then the whole debate was that once you do them, what happens next? They'll go back to the same old bad ways, nothing will change, and we'll be back to square one, and we're recapitalizing them again. And let me tell you, this is exactly what happens in India every 5 years. I mean, and the World Bank comes in and gives them a big, long loan, and the RBI comes in, big, long funding and recapitalization of state-owned sector. As you know, in India, bulk of the financial banking sector is state-owned. Since privatization, there has actually not been much of investment, or hardly any investment by the state. And in fact, wisely, the state bank and the government have worked on putting some of their resources and minds in terms of developing the financial architecture or the financial infrastructure of the country. Whereas the private banks, it took them several years to try and stabilize post-privatization. These are entirely my thoughts and my observations from the time, because I was engaged from the private sector side, from the IFC side in the Pakistani banking sector. And at the time they were privatized, these banks lacked not only the financial resources, they were undercapitalized, they lacked expertise. I can tell you about a couple of banks where they have completely changed the staff that they had inherited post-privatization, and they have ratcheted up their skills, and they've got clever people, smart bankers, and they've been able to attract talent from abroad. They've been able to develop risk management, compliance, and other policies, which I can say this quite readily. They are consonant with best practices across major markets and the emerging markets also. So there has been a lot of investment in banks done by the private sector and to enhance their capacity, but a lot more needs to be done, as we will see going down this presentation. I've just put in what are the other institutions that we have. We have DFIs, 8 institutions. These are Pakistan's bilateral relationships with different, so the Pak China, Pak Brunei, Pak Kuwait, etc. Overall, some of these have played a role. Pak Kuwait has played a role in some areas. 1 or 2 institutions have played a role in some infrastructure financing, bank financing, etc. But a lot of them have really not got their vision right. And at one stage, I told the government that you really do need to think through whether you need to call these institutions DFIs, while all they're doing is investing their liquidity in the stock market, etc., and are not really playing a long-term financing role. Anyway, less said to the best. Leasing companies, industry is basically practically on one leg because they've allowed banks and other money market institutions to lease as well. But they play an important role, especially for the smaller businesses. Modarba companies, which are very much in vogue at some point, are under the shadow of commercial banks, which have grown in strength. I helped set up the first discount house. This was in connection with one of the first bond issues in the country, which was the WAPDA bond issue. It was the first bond issue. I wrote the rules. I'm very proud of that. But it's not a private sector. It was backed by a government guarantee, and WAPDA did not have the financials to be able to support it on its own credit. It needed a government guarantee, but it needed liquidity, and we set up a discount house to be able to intermediate liquidity in there. Housing finance companies, by and large, not playing any role, and in different and difficult stages. The only bright spark is the Pakistan Mortgage Refinance Company, and we will come to it later. Insurance companies, several of them, they're well capitalized, they are playing a role, and they are expanding their services and are well capitalized at this stage. Should we move to the next slide? I've just put some, this is a bit of a cut and paste, but I've just put sort of a lay of the land rather than talking about each one of them. You have mutual funds, asset management, investment companies, brokerages, etc., and the regulatory body for these, and who licenses them and in effect supervises them. Let me go to the next slide. We are about half an hour into this presentation. Let me pause and let me ask, are there any questions that anyone wants to raise before I go forward?
I think we will take question at the end of your presentation.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Great. So, the question I posed, are they playing their role and what more is needed? So, I put a little slide there. That slide I attribute to the Economic Survey of Pakistan. I have to apologize. I've used the 2021 and 21 to 22 survey. The latest survey came out, I think yesterday, if I'm not wrong, or day before, and I did not update the figures then. Mind you, I looked at the economic survey. It was a bit of a miserable story, so I don't think you'll miss out anything major. So we have credit to the private sector of 13.7% in FY21. I can assure you one thing, that that new economic survey will, as of now, the latest figures are that the credit to the private sector has really fallen off during year on year. I've seen various statistics. Credit to the private sector has dropped by 90%, and that's, no one's going to be borrowing at 21% interest rates, and neither are banks lending to private sector because of risk aversion. And a lot of sorts of industry are shut down. Auto industry is shut down to large borrowers. Steel is having difficulties, and so on and so forth. Just as a comparator, I thought 2021 maybe a normal year. Let's use that. 13.7, 14% is private sector lending to GDP. Compare that with the world average. India at 55% is pretty low, needs to ratchet up its game. But India has moved to a slightly different paradigm. It's moved to FDI flows and equity flows, both from within and abroad. And of course, some of the most successful countries in our region have higher numbers. So what I do want to underline is, and underscore is, that we have a long way to go. And I say this with my bias coming from the IFC, that it is the private sector that will drive economic growth and development in the country. Basically, one of the figures that we use is the M2 to GDP, and what are we talking about in Pakistan? Is 38 to 40%. Again, this is from the 2022 economic survey. I put in comparative data just at the bottom, because no point saying 38 and 40%. What is happening in Bangladesh, India, and I go to neighboring country China. So this is in our neighborhood. So there is work cut out for us. But let me also not just talk about doom and gloom. I mean, this number can go up, and it has. If you look at the figures in the table that I put up there, it has been higher, and it can go up. It is dependent on private sector activity and how you spur the private sector and how you also encourage banks to take risks. So it's dependent on a number of variables. Just before I go into the next slide about microfinance and specialized sector, you see, for banks to lend to any sector, to appreciate that they are taking a risk. They are taking a risk on that sector, a risk of default, a risk of liquidity. And there are times when markets can change very suddenly, when market conditions can change, and this is beyond the control of the managements of those enterprises or of banks. Petroleum companies is imperiled. So banks have to take into consideration a number of factors in lending to private sector. Banks are not venture funds. They are using their depositors' money, and they are conscious of the fact that they have to get that money back. Otherwise, they will be illiquid, they'll be out of business. And they have to look at not only the liquidity, the recoverability, but also the ability of the client to pay on time, both the markup and the principal. Banks are also need to have capacity to be able to intermediate in different sectors. They don't just rush into any sector. They need to have, when I say capacity, they need to have, one is the capital, second is the human staffing and the resources, the third is the data and the understanding of the segment, fourth is the ability to go to lawyers and legal experts, because at the end of the day, the contract has to be on a very firm footing. Fifth is if there are regulatory impediments to it, which could be taxation, could be recovery, could be some other local regulation. They have to be very aware of it. For instance, just take a housing sector, and we'll discuss it in the context of housing. Unless you have mortgage and title and the ability to transfer those title to banks, banks are going to be reluctant to lend. But we'll cover that in data segments. So much on the banking sector. But let me tell you, since privatization, the banking sector has gone into new segments and expanded its horizon. And it is driven by the fact that it has to diversify, and bankers look to diversification in order to protect their portfolios, so that no one incident or incidents economic factor can actually impact their performance and imperil their portfolio. Let me go to some of the specialized areas in our financial system. Let me go quickly, because I want to take some questions and get into that. So the next slide, please, Mansoor Sahab, if you could go, microfinance in Pakistan. And could you go to the next slide? Yes, please. The good thing is microfinance was started in Pakistan, if I may say, the previous one, please, yes, was actually the first microfinance institution in Pakistan was set up by IFC. It was in collaboration with Haque. And today it is called the HBL Microfinance. It was originally called the first microfinance bank of Pakistan. And it is, I'm happy to say, it is one of the leading institutions. I think it is the #1 institution in Pakistan. And what I'm even happier to say, that when we began with very small capital, about $1.5 million, we were wondering how big it would grow. Today, it's got a deposit base of 100 billion rupees. So it's really come of age. But there are challenges in the sector, and following last year's floods and the current difficult economic situation, microfinance industry is facing some challenges, but that is part of the nature. I'm confident that they will dig out themselves out of such current challenges. Economic situation, as it improves, will give them the impetus to continue the expansion, because a lot more is needed. Now, microfinance, if I may just clarify, microfinance is not in the very lowest segment of the economy. You basically need programs like the ISP, SARS, or whatever. I mean, they're the same thing. For you need a social safety net. Microfinance targets the mom and pop shop, people with who were. It's really a family affair, few employees, basically running a small business on their own, be it a small school, daycare, hair salon, kirana store or something. It is not small businesses. Small businesses by definition employ others and have more scale. These are very focused enterprises. And I think this is important to have microfinance expand in a country like ours, where there is poverty and there is difficulty in access to finance, because it provides a basic capital to supplement the work and energy of entrepreneurs, and it helps promote entrepreneurs to stand on their own feet as opposed to looking for a job, which the country can ill afford. And some of them, a proportion of microfinance borrowers graduate to SME. Certainly, that is the expectation and the outlook. If we move to the next slide, please. I just wanted to put those numbers about microfinance into perspective. As to Bangladesh compared with Pakistan. I also have a slide for India, but I didn't really fit it onto my one slide. But if you look at it, the percentage of financing to GDP in Bangladesh is 3.1. In Pakistan, I don't know whether you can see the figure, but it's 0.7. So, sorry, I'm very sorry that the slide seems to have covered that, but it's, I'm sorry, it's not 0.7, it's 0.5%. So, 0.5. So, it's a low one. We have a long way to go. But overall, I think the industry is on the right trajectory. And I'm sorry I put the PMRC thing on this wrong slide. It relates to the housing finance side, but I will just come. Shall we move to the next segment, please? The next slide. It is financial inclusion. You know, from nowhere, this is a priority, and I actually commend State Bank for making a priority. They are putting a lot of resources towards it. And the government has also got a national financial inclusion strategy. The World Bank is very much involved in it. So is IFC. IFC is working with the private sector. And you know, I've given you some of the numbers, you know, which are indicative of where we're heading. About 53 million accounts is actually pretty good in the country. In a country of 200 million odd people, 220 or so. But there are segments which are underserved. There are segments, you know, if you look at the bottom of it, there are fewer accounts of women. Women are excluded from the workforce by and large, not many women in the formal sector. In the formal sector, we have a huge participation of women, but they're not compensated. And we have to really rack up our act towards providing access to finance for women. The government has got a gender mainstreaming policy. They've got several other policies, and they're working quite diligently to take various policy actions in this horizon. There are places in the country which are underbanked, with the access to finance, with the access to a financial institution is difficult. Yeah, and totally, I know places that takes 20 to 30 miles. I had a statistic which I did not want to. I don't know where it is. I couldn't lay my hands on it, but I've come across it. How many branches there are in rural areas? Bricks and mortar banks in rural areas. It's very costly. They don't have staff to be able to put out there. And then all the ancillary services, cash moving in, cash moving out. So they have undertaken the regulators A couple of things that have been done. The agent banking services have come into play, which is, and there are quite a few agents in the country. There are, I believe, several 100,000, 500,000 agents of all the banks. So agent banking means that there is an agent who go working for the bank and actually providing financial service. Doorstep, and provide money, bring the money to you, take deposits, and be able to put it into the system. State Bank has just a few institutions to as digital banks that will also help take banking into far-flung areas. And of course, we've seen technology being developed by commercial banks. They've invested a lot of money. So anyway, financial inclusion platforms, mobile platforms and IT platforms, and a lot of things can be done on the IT system. However, I find it very amusing. I turn up at branches sometimes to see long lines of people there waiting with the electric bills to pay. So I asked, and I stand in line and I talk to people. I ask them, I said, वो मोबाइल पे ऐप पे जाके यूएस पे इतनी गर्मी में खड़े होने की क्या जरूरत है, आपको पे कर दें उसके थ्रू, and some of the apps actually get your bill and all you have to do is schedule it, pay it regularly. So I heard a very funny comment saying, बेगम साहब ने मुझे दे दिया बिल के जाओ जाके बैंक पे पे करके आ जाओ. मैंने कहा बेगम साहब को कहे कि मोबाइल ऐप पे डाल दें, बिल को ऑटोमेटिकली पे हो जाता है, आपको खड़े होने की जरूरत नहीं होगी. The banks have built the system. There's also a lot of work that's gone into money transfer systems, and the State Bank has also, with the help of Karandaz, a great organization set up with the help of DFID and the Germans, etc. They've helped set up the RAS system, which has also made transfer of money more seamless and more cost effective. However, if we can go to the next slide, that will highlight some of the challenges because I basically mapped, number of accounts as the percentage of the population aged 15 and above. And the second bar is basically access to finance for women aged 15 and above. And, we are far behind Sri Lanka, India, and if I say Nepal also, I'm a bit surprised. Nepal banking system has to make a lot more strides, but it's a smaller country than us. I put the same data into a data slide because the World Bank data. So next slide and the one after. I just want to go through very quickly. This is the amount of money that is in the housing, the financial sector, in the housing finance sector. I don't really want to talk about it too much because we have a long way to go. I think that we really don't have we've come up with different policies, but we've not really been able to effectively service mortgage sector. And now with interest rates where they are, it's going to be very difficult for people to borrow. However, we have done a few things which are useful as far as the infrastructure of this industry or this industry segment is concerned. We have created a PMRC. Sorry, I put it onto a different slide, the foot of a different slide. I think the Pakistan Mortgage Refinance Corporation, which is owned by all the banks. IFC also has a stake in it, a very small stake in it, will help bring more resources into this area, help banks to be able to originate, finance, and then refinance it themselves, because banks don't have long-term financing. It will help promote more affordable mortgages with the longer tenor. Of course, what is happening is with the higher interest rates, the affordability is coming into question. But where we need to do a lot more work and where laws and regulations are important is to be able to have ease of access to titling, mortgages, recoveries, facilitate that. Maybe specialized courts could be one answer, as we've seen in several economies. And that will help and encourage banks to finance this. This, let me just make a very broad statement. Housing finance and mortgage finance is one of the biggest elements of the UK and the US financial system. Roughly a third of the balance sheets of the major banks in the US are devoted to mortgage financing or real estate financing, as they describe it. The same thing in the UK, where they used to have specialized housing societies, but the banks have gone into this and bought up the housing society and built this as a brand. This is something where regulatory action is needed. But the problem is, in our country, the property market and property registration and transfer is a provincial subject. So while you can convince the center, they turn around and say the provinces haven't done much. And in the Punjab, a lot of progress has been made earlier on through certain World Bank projects. They were able to put land registries on the computer, and to be able to create mortgages, etc. But the adjudication process is something that needs a lot more work, faster adjudication, etc. And in many areas of the country, the problem that lies is that there is no clear title, because it's been inherited through centuries, and there are many claimants to it. And each case then goes to courts, which takes a long time. So that is a huge area of difficulty for the banks, and takes an inordinate amount of time. I have on the next slide, just to put things into context, given some figures, mortgage loans to GDP, specialized in the German company that actually does collate some of the data. You'll see that this is some very large numbers. But in Indonesia, they built better systems. They started from scratch, and they basically put in a good mortgage housing systems, and a lot of mortgage is financed through microfinance. And Bank Rakyat of Indonesia is one of the biggest microfinance institutions in the world, primarily provides a lot of housing finance to lower income segments. Can we just move to the next segment? Let me just move very quickly so that I can move there to private equity. There isn't much data.
Sir, may I ask a question?
Yes, okay.
With the current KIBOR at 20.16, as the website of State Bank of Pakistan is mentioning, what would be its impact on the IRR of the new businesses?
New borrowers, that's what I mentioned, affordability is out of the window. It makes it very difficult for people to afford new mortgages. Those that are already holders of mortgages, you see a lot of mortgages have been provided as floating mortgages. Their interest rate will go up, but there are provisions in there for how much it will go up by each quarter or within a year. And the other thing is they have several of them have the option to go for a conversion to fixed rate, which then creates its own stresses. But yes, at 21% interest rate, that's not the best time to borrow. Okay, have I answered your question?
Yes, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Private equity, huge area, and it's not that it doesn't happen, but it's just not on the radar screen of a lot of people, of a lot of authorities, and finding data was difficult for me. But I did find a very interesting article, and I have attributed to this journal, and just captured a little bit of it. I've referenced the article. Please would encourage you to go and read them. But people who've got institutions and business houses that have surplus capital have actually set up both formal shops for private equity or venture capital, etc. And there are several family offices. These are basically groups of people working for a rich businessman who's got surplus money and who are investing that money into businesses. And there is also a third set of pool here, which is in the tech industry, tech entrepreneurs, and there are tech pools which are investing in tech industries, small sums of money. And I've actually visited one of them, which gives promising ideas, $10,000. It says, take it to the next stage, define your next stage of success, etc. And then if you're able to achieve those metrics, we are then able to give you much more. I mentioned some institutions. With IFC, I did set up one of the first, didn't make the attempt to set up one of the first private equity plays. This was with a Mudarba, a leasing company called BRR. That was very limited success, pedestrian performance. We got our money back. We invested, as happens in venture capital, in about 10 or 12 companies, and it was very difficult for them to make those inroads because of the nature of our businesses here, and even more difficult for them to make an exit out of it. And then, of course, IFC also set up a venture outfit with JS, Jahangir Siddiqui and Company. Again, if I may say, mixed success. There are others. There is Baltoro. I hear that they've actually invested in several companies. They have on their website, they've listed several portfolio companies. There is Abraj, which is now defunct, but Abraj has its own business model of investing from Dubai into different companies in Pakistan. One of them being K Electric and Baiko and so on. And then USAID also came up with some private public initiatives in which they committed some money with some company. I don't think that came at the right time, and it had limited success. But this is an area which exists in the country, needs to be formalized. And the reason I say this is, I'm sorry, I'm using the word I, and forgive me for that, but sometimes by, without intending to, you end up doing a few good things. I was in India and setting up the first tech fund, and I'm talking of 1992. And this was at the encouragement and behest of ICICI of India, and which was promoting tech. And we did put up the first tech fund in India for IT. And there were companies which I visited with some, there was no tech expertise, engineer with us and so on, trying to understand what we'll do with tech, etc. They had infrastructure problems in India. India had, it was very nascent, and there were these small companies called Infosys and all that, and some money was put into that, etc. But there were two outcomes from that. One was, yes, supported very small companies in the tech space, which then eventually grew and have grown as huge international names, and some failed. But the other thing that came out, it was a very honest dialogue with the government of India at that point, saying that, look, I mean, if you institutionalize it, create the laws, create the regulation, and create the pass-through from a tax perspective, you would then be able to attract a lot more private equity and FDI funding. And actually, we went to some of the top lawyers there and created the fund structure as a trust, etc., and then pointed out to the government of India that, it would be far more efficient if you could actually create the legislation and create new institutions to set up private equity and venture funds in India, which they did. And I can tell you that, last quarter, India attracted 60 billion worth of FDI flows, and this is going largely tech sector and manufacturing sector, etc., and helping modernize industry. And this is equity and long-term capital coming in there, and that is what is changing the landscape of India. We can go to the next couple of things, if I may say, very short. in sort of short tones. I've covered the venture, the startup financing, but fintech you see in Pakistan, there's a lot of sweat entity coming in, and there is funding from abroad. We've had some spectacular successes, some not so great enterprises, which have actually brought down our name in the market because I think the accusations, they were not well managed. You will also find fintechs are being backed by banks and other financial institutions. And I think there's a huge future for them. I think we have a lot of talent. We have a lot of people. We need colleges to produce more techies. We need that infrastructure critically, and that is what some of our neighboring countries are able to do. China has been able to do that. India for a long time, as you know. We need to produce a lot more talent out there, and this talent will be hungry and produce its own successes. Long-term finance for infrastructure and industry, I don't really want to delve too much into it, but a few years ago, I'd actually gone to the government and told them that, at that point, this is 5 years ago, I looked at the balance sheets of banks, and I said that less than 3% of banks' balance sheets have financing of more than 5%. That number has changed now. And I said, you can't build up industry on that. And I quoted examples we had in the past, PFIs like PICIC, NDFC, Bankers Equity, etc. And PICIC was the backbone for helping finance long-term industry in Pakistan. The equivalent of that, ICICI, is still there. A few years ago, I did some research. 60% of ICICI's balance sheet was in heavy industry and infrastructure in India, and backbone of India's financial system. Since then, it's reduced. The number has reduced, but it's only reduced because they've gone into financing, consumer finance, and all that. So other segments have increased. So the importance of that in India has, in ICICI India has diminished. You need long-term financial institutions that don't have long-term money, and you need some specialization. On top of that, many of our segments of industry are closed. So yesterday's economic survey that came out, I only went looking for one figure. What is the percentage of investment to total GDP? And the economic survey showed 15%. It's a bit surprising. I don't see the investment on the ground. But anyway, that number is what it is. And in the past, I've even seen 9% and so on. And if I may just reflect on it and tell you that the regional average has been 30% plus in South Asia. So, you really need to be able to invest for the future. Agricultural finance, growing segment. I can say this safely that a number of banks are getting into it. Habib Bank is doing a lot of work on agricultural finance, and it is financing smallholders and farmers also in the mid segment. It is financing livestock. And the reason I have not put up a slide and numbers is because these numbers are still being collated, and they get distorted because there's something called commodity financing operations, which are refinanced by the state bank. So those will show a huge amount of numbers, etc. But those are literally buying crops as they come on. What I'm talking about is agricultural finance, going to the small farmer and to be able to invest in the agri sector. I did not have the credible numbers to be able to show them, therefore I did not. But a lot is happening, and it is being forced on the banks simply because you look at our import-dependent industry, which is in a mess. Agriculture, at least, is one bright spark, and I'm delighted to see that banks like HBL are actually building that capacity and wish to get into it deeper. I can't really say much about supply chains in this country, in Pakistan, but we need supply chains both across borders We need to link our own industry with international supply chains. And remember, supply chain isn't the question about small industry. You need, in the middle, you need consolidators. These are big companies that buy from small companies, consolidate, ensure quality product, and know the international marketplace, and have the financial resources to do that. We have several consolidators who are able to do that. We need to grow that. We need to be much more active on that front, especially with respect to agricultural products. And I'm seeing several countries in the Middle East region that have stepped up agricultural product. I see Turkish products on the market in Europe and in America. I see a lot of the Middle East, Maghreb countries, Tunisia coming on stream, and bringing agri products to the consumer abroad. Whereas we seem to be still focused on selling mangoes to the Middle East and to some other countries. We need to go beyond that. Again, data is scarce, a lot more work needs to be done, but we have some stellar companies. They're inward looking, and they're more looking at distributor finance. And I actually spoke to one of those companies, which is building out a software, state-of-the-art software, etc. But again, for domestic supply chain, they need to be focused on the international side. That should help our exports and provide a different playing field for our industry. I'm going to stop there and open it up to questions, because I think I've taken just about over an hour, and I would apologize for speaking so much.
Thank you, Khaleel. Thank you. That was very nice. But Khaleel, I'd like you to reflect on the dying stock market in Pakistan. I don't think you have spoken enough about that.
No, I didn't.
I mean, it has gone from 20% of GDP to now roughly 5% of GDP. Plus, I don't know whether you focus on now giving a paper where we look at
single digit low
conglomerates in the stock market. The conglomerates in the stock market are roughly 31% of the conglomerates own the stock market. 31 conglomerates, sorry. So, which is about the same as what Mahbub said, 22 families. So where is the stock market working? Secondly, hobby house. The board of directors, we looked at them, did a network analysis on them. They're basically some club members. Does that comply with the IFC's, rules that the board of the governors should not be that connected? They're totally connected. So please tell me, with connected board of directors, with the brokers owning the stock market, PSX was sold to the Chinese, and the Chinese have spent the money and kind of written it off. They don't even want to come and look at it. So please first tell us what's the story in the stock market is.
So, thank you, Nadeem. Yes, I did not go into the stock market and the capital markets too deeply. Given the state of the economy, this is a bit of a moot point. Stock markets are really a story of the economy. They reflect a mood of confidence, and as a result of the confidence, the valuation, they are also the price of stock on the market is a discount of the earnings and the earnings potential for investors. 2 or 3 things that are currently impacting earnings are going to be under stress and have been. The discount rate that's being applied is significant, and investor liquidity is under stress because people have seen declining valuations, and actually overall liquidities can be under stress when it comes to the capital markets because of the depreciating rupee. People have alternative uses for that. And remember, the investor in a stock market is a savvy person. This is not your common Joe, your average Joe or Ladita, if I may use the Pakistani context. These are people who have the money, the ability to be able to switch from markets and instruments and places. And all I can summarize is that the liquidity has been withdrawn. Sorry, someone saying something? Sorry.
No, go ahead. Oh.
Yeah, so liquidity has been withdrawn, and there are one or two other aspects of it. At one
But
stage,
Khaleel, let me just say something here.
GG.
First of all, we've got a very strange stock market.
Uh-huh.
And I think thanks to the advice of the international donors, we've got a stock market. Maybe we shouldn't have one. Because our stock market is very strange. The largest company is OGDC,
Yeah.
which is a government-owned company with 10% in the stock market. Then comes PSO. Then comes British American Tobacco, which shouldn't even be here. It has been forced to list. Then comes some multinationals that are forced to list. I mean, they don't want to list it. Nestle, for example, doesn't want to list in the world. We forced to list here, right? They only have the average sort of float in the stock market from each company is 10% or 15%, with everybody controlling the stock market. No takeover can take place. The largest company in the stock market is Engro, which is a joke, which is less than $1 billion. Other companies don't even want to list. So I think, quite frankly, maybe we should just close down the stock market and call it quits.
Yeah, nothing that would cause a lot of hardship for the common man who has actually invested in them. Has invested in them. There are certain benefits that they've gotten, and they are stuck in them. So if we delist them, we will cause a hardship. Second thing is that the stock exchange is a place where these companies should be able to raise more capital. They have raised capital for them, but yes, coming to the point that you've raised, there's a huge swath of public sector enterprises, OGDC, PSO, etc. But stock exchanges have public sector enterprises. In our world, OGDC forms a huge percentage, and frankly, the 40% of the stock market is abysmal, whereas to the public sector, it's huge. So really, Pakistan's economy is all about public sector financing. Stock exchange seems to have gone that way. And unless we are able to bring in better names, better companies into the market, it's going to remain dull. The other thing is that we've also, international investors would come to the market because we were an emerging market. We then fell into a frontier market. And right now in the frontier market, we are not even 1%. We are a fraction of a 1%. So we are only there simply because we are a market and we have certain laws and rules and regulations. Now, two things you mentioned. One is the Chinese have come in. The Chinese have come in, they brought technology, they brought software, but what they haven't brought is the investor base. The Chinese haven't come in to invest into the Pakistani stock market. They're quite savvy about it. Yes, we need to have some order, maybe throughout the government enterprise if we need to, or create a separate market or separate window for them. How do we encourage smaller companies to come and raise capital?
I don't think, Khaleel, I don't think it's the government enterprises that are the problem. The issue is our companies are not growing and they're not there. Engro, for example, let's take Engro as an example. Engro, our largest company, exports nothing, is an inward-looking company, is part of it, the conglomerate is into IPPs. The conglomerate is, look at Lucky, for example. Lucky is into IPPs, into cars, into phones. They're all domestic-looking companies, and they all want government subsidies. Engro would be nothing without the gas subsidy. So I think the issue is, quite frankly, our private sector is not vibrant enough. I think the only reason we have the stock market is to please the IFC and the international community. Otherwise, why do we have the stock market?
Yeah, look, it's part of the capital market. There are
IPOs.
Yeah, there are very few.
There are no IPOs there.
Yeah, and for the last few years, I haven't seen any IPOs on the market at all. You're absolutely right. The stock market is, but Nadeem, I've seen the Turkish stock market go through. Literally, there was a period when before Erdogan, early part of Erdogan, etc., when Ozal and all these people were there, and the Turkish market was completely dead. There were very few companies listed, hardly anything going on. Public finances dominated the whole thing in the state. Today, the Turkish market is very, very vibrant. Lots of companies listed, it's playing its role. It could do more. Egypt, which we helped put together the stock market there, was the forum through which we've privatized a number of Egyptian public sector companies and banks. yes, it had great days. It's going through stress at the moment. Liquidity has been withdrawn. And you've had a lot of investors from the Gulf coming into the Egyptian market. Similarly, we've had people coming into the Pakistani markets. Now, I would expect the banks to have play a bigger, have a bigger share on the stock exchange, but they are again heavily discounted, and their share prices have fallen sharply.
So let's look at the banks. Let's look at the banks, Khaleel. As I
Correct.
said, the banks are great. Banking is a great career in the bank in the country. I think we missed it. We've had a prime minister from banking. We had 3 finance ministers from banking. Every good job in this country is reserved for bankers. I looked at the National Bank thing yesterday. I thought I'd apply. Say only bankers need apply. I mean, I've never seen that. We economists don't have this finance minister. Only economists need apply. Now, these finance companies, these banks, these microfinance.
Nadeem, I've lost you.
I said the banks, where everything is reserved for bankers. Bankers are the key thinkers in our country. The boards have, you know, who the biggest members on boards are? Bankers. The bankers mafia controls the boards. The bankers mafia controls the DFIs. The bankers mafia controls the banks. They get heavy salaries. A salary on a DIFC is easily 50 lakh rupees a month, right? A salary for a banker, a senior banker, is 2 crore rupees a month. Yet in financial intermediation, they do absolutely nothing. The DFIs are virtually dead. They've got dead capital, which doesn't grow. They invest a little bit in the stock market, otherwise the government bonds. The banks only invest in government bonds. Quite frankly, have we gained anything by privatizing banks? And do we need these DIFCs? Why don't we just fold them up?
The developer finance companies are not really playing that role. I think I mentioned this earlier on. But it's a very difficult scenario for the government, because they've actually set up these companies as bilateral investments with Brunei and Kuwait and this and that and the other. And they need to look into it and to encourage
Let's
them.
be fair. Let's think about it, Khaleel. They were set up by bureaucrats as retirement pushy jobs, and bankers have taken them over. So let's look at the incentive structure too.
The other hand, you know, if you look at you know, financial intermediation that's going through microfinance, playing a great role. Number of customers expanded, looking at the overall portfolio, etc. And they have a long way to go. So what I've been actually saying throughout the presentation is that yes, we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go, and we need to actually expand into those priority segments, which is at the bottom of the economy. On the other hand, our whole economy is actually performing very poorly. And for factors, for reasons, you know, the stock market and lending by banks is all a story of how the economy performs. The only viable sector to finance these days for banks, which are flush with liquidity, is the state sector. And actually, as you know, the state sector's demands on the banking sector are endless. Last few years, our debt has really been going up. All we've been doing is creating more debt.
Let me also tell you, let me go to the floor, Asifa Tareen, but before Asifa, let me also tell you, the banking sector spreads have not fallen since denationalization. They are in fact increased. So the whole
intermediation
point
spreads.
of denationalization was these are operating like a cartel. Secondly, on financial inclusion, Khaleel, let me tell you, banks don't give credit cards or open accounts for over 6.
मेरा क्वेश्चन ये था कि ठीक है, फाइनेंशियल मार्केट में इनका कोई इतना बड़ा कंट्रीब्यूशन नहीं है, लेकिन जो लेंडिंग कर रही हैं बैंक्स, वो भी तो मेरे ख्याल में मोस्टली ज्यादातर स्टेट को ही हो रही हैं. प्राइवेट सेक्टर तो उसमें भी कहीं नजर नहीं आता, या इन्वेस्टर वहाँ भी इन्वेस्टमेंट पर्पस से वहाँ भी कोई ऐसी मुझे नहीं नजर आई. ज्यादातर जो चंक है वो तो स्टेट की तरफ जा रहा है, गवर्नमेंट बारो कर रही है बैंक से. तो इसका मतलब अगर गवर्नमेंट डिफॉल्ट कर जाएगी तो पूरा बैंकिंग सेक्टर डिफॉल्ट कर जाएगा.
देखिए, गवर्नमेंट जब डिफॉल्ट करती है तो देन that's a very difficult situation. चंद जगहों पे हुआ है, and we've all seen the implications of that. Frankly, before they do that, government के पास जो domestic debt है उसके लिए तो they keep printing money, and that is what is fueling inflation even in our economy today. On the other hand, let me just go to your main point. Banks are financing public sector as opposed to private sector. You are correct. When the private sector has been robust and doing well, banks have never hesitated to lend to private sector. It is a preference for banks. And I'll tell you why, because the spreads are higher. The spreads are higher, and in the past, banks have actually had huge percentages of exposure, and within their own systems, they do have limitations on public sector debt as part of their risk management. At the present time, industry is in stress, and the public sector's appetite for debt is insatiable. And what do banks do? If they were to stop lending to the public sector, it would cause a crisis itself. And the banks would have, to bear the consequences of that. And also, please note that in the Pakistani economy, the largest segment of economic activity relates to public sector. And I'm not going into whether they're profit-making or loss-making, etc., etc. That's a different subject altogether. But the largest segment of the economy is public sector. It's and the largest borrower in the economy is the government of Pakistan.
और दूसरी तरफ से डिपॉजिटर भी मेरे ख्याल में I think सबसे बड़ा public sector ही है.
No, public sector depositors जो हैं, they go across to National Bank. That is their preferred bank. There are private sector deposits, and private sector deposits still dominate the banking sector. That I can tell you categorically.
Rana Asad, can you ask your question, please?
Yes, I was waiting for the host to unmute me. So my question is, you have told it very nicely about the banking sector and all these things, but most of our economy is undocumented. So how is that challenge being addressed by the banking sector, and is there any specific policies or measures that is proven to be effective, keeping in view the high PIBOR rate and the documentation and everything that is required by the bank versus the undocumented economy? Thank you.
That's a very good question, actually. The undocumented economy presents a challenge for banks. They cannot onboard those, they cannot take that money in unless there is a formal bank account open. However, there is no, provided an individual has a Sharafti card, a company has its registration documents, a trust has its incorporation documents, etc. Banks do open bank accounts. Money flows into those accounts. And if there are proscribed entities or entities against which the tax authorities have taken notice, then there's action, and then the banks are notified through the right channels, then the banks take those actions and either freeze those accounts or investigate them, etc. Now, it is true that the informal economy is very large in the country. Do you think the money goes into the banking sector? Some of it probably does, but the bulk of it is outside. And the reasons for that are the taxation system, etc., in the country. Time and again, measures are taken to formalize some of that, etc. But the informal sector keeps growing. Can banks actually play a role? I don't know. What banks can probably do is to help put in formal money and help create mechanisms which will draw in that informal money into productive activity. I think housing sector was one area in which one of the governments in Pakistan in recent years basically no question will be asked source of the money. Create housing colonies and housing finance, etc. And you see whole sorts of them. Presumably, I was told if you drive from Lahore to Islamabad on the motorway, every few miles you see housing colonies around there. Unfortunately, I've only driven at night, so I have to see that. But that is where a lot of the informal money is going through. It's not going into the productive sectors of the economy.
Okay, sir, I have one question as well. This is very much similar to, is there any other hands? Are there any more hands? Okay, I can go ahead. So my question is, how do you see this 0.65% withdrawal, tax on cash withdrawal. Do you think it can actually make people go more undocumented? And I don't see them good impact of putting such taxes. It will be bad for both for the consumers as well as for the banking systems. That's my opinion. I just want yours. Thank you.
I don't like such taxation or impediments to people being able to withdraw money from their own bank accounts. People's, it is a disincentive to saving. It is a disincentive to banking sector, and I think it is not the best thing. It's not the most ingenious thing. I think the authority should be taking steps to bring more of the informal economy into the banking sector, into the documented sector, and that's all I can say. I've just seen the headlines. I haven't read the budget in between. It came out yesterday or something. So I'm not a great supporter of taxes on this.
Okay, thank you, sir. Sir, let me check if there are more hands colleagues, do we have more questions? We should close the session. Okay, we do.
Thank you very much.
Yes, just one question again. In these times, weather unpredictability and all these things, and huge losses being faced by farmers and landowners. Is there any specific intervention that the bank is planning on doing for agricultural sector so that it will support it? Because their harvest is mostly dependent on the weather, and the weather is getting so unpredictable for the last couple of years.
So you've actually asked two things: initiatives to help farmers, and the other thing about climate, which is really mitigation, if I may distinguish between the two. So on the mitigation side, let me just mention, there are insurance companies in Pakistan, Jubilee is one of them that I know of, which are providing crop insurance cover. And, this is for bank intermediated loans. They're just not going out and finding retail farmers and just covering them. These are for bank intermediated loans where there is data and there is a land survey, etc. Just on the other hand, with IFC, I had helped create a global facility for indexed insurance, which was basically to facilitate rapid payment, because insurance can often be painful and long, but it's a different story altogether. You can look it up on the web. As far as financing for farmers, for many years in Pakistan, the main instrument was the Zarai Taraqqiyati Bank, and of course the refinance schemes that the state bank has, which was either for commodity financing, etc. There was very little that the banks were doing in terms of direct financing of farmers. They were purchasing crops and output and the storage of those. And in effect, the middleman and government agencies, etc. Direct intermediation and loans to the farmers have been provided by the informal sector in our economy. That is something that is expected to change. And what we need is greater investment in the sector. But coupled with that, we also need several interventions. As I mentioned, there is a need for land reforms, registry, etc., and to be able to create mortgages and liens. But I have seen banks get involved in financing smallholders and medium-sized farmers with up to 20-25 acres, and for livestock, etc., on the basis of future flows of the produce made. So they are taking the risk. There is a limitation on how much they can finance. They do not want to impair their balance sheet. And the third thing is they're getting to understand the segment better. We have schemes in place which are government supported also, but I think there's a limitation, comes through the budget, comes through the central bank, comes from various provinces, but we need to replace them with more formal financing, and the impediments are there but the capacity is being developed by various banks that I am aware of. So it's just started. I think it's a long way to go. And I think it's also very good from a bank's point of view, because this is domestic production and for domestic consumption. In fact, the other day we were estimating that if we were able to better manage our agri sector, we could save several $1 billion. We'd estimated an amount also in terms of food imports, because at the moment we're importing wheat, we're importing our edible oil and a few other essential agri commodities. And there is no reason why this can't be grown.
Hi.
Thank you for your talk. Sir, I have a question on cryptocurrency. Yesterday, RBI gave a guidelines on CBDCs. So, and a few months ago, there was a report by IMF on huge adoption of cryptocurrency in Southeast Asian nations. So how does banking sector look at it? And is there a way that banking sector can turn it into an advantage? Thank you.
Okay, you're basically talking about currencies, digital currencies, basically. Is that correct? This is a new area, growing area. And for banks, in a way, if you look at it, this will be a natural evolution. And it's happened in China. China's already got a digital currency in place. The UK is exploring this. India and RBI is doing that. Several countries are not in favor of that, because then, you can, the dominance of certain currencies then gets challenged. That is happening. I don't think strong and stable currencies for that to happen. So, that's why the renminbi is there. It's got a digital currency, and they put a cap onto it. It's not, every renminbi is not a digital currency anymore at all. India is coming in, one or two other countries are talking about it. So you will see more of it in place. Could help, the next stage would be linkages and how you can help settlement of those currencies. And the third thing is that, countries are also building alternative settlement systems for that trade. That could be a very important step forward, especially as various trading blocks are formed and various bilateral trading relationships are enhanced.
Okay, I have one last question and then let's close the session. Sir, दो बातें. एक तो I just want to ask, you talked about financial inclusion. And for that, women's financial literacy, I think that's where we still lack. I want to listen from your experience, learn from you. And secondly, sir, you talked about fintech future in Pakistan. So I want to ask from academia's perspective, how do you think fintech industry or the banking industry can connect with academia to train us, to encourage us and take active participation in sort of such ventures? Please comment on both, and then we'll close the session in the end. Thank you.
Look, thank you. Actually, women's financial literacy, I think, is absolutely critical. I think that needs to be enhanced. Women need to take more charge of not only their finances, but different aspects of their lives. And finances is very critical. I mentioned at some stage in the presentation that in the informal labor force, there are lots of women there. They get underpaid or don't get compensated. In microfinance also, I get to see a lot of women borrowers, but at the end of the day, are they taking an educated decision, or is it the husband's taking a decision and using that as a front? That needs to be checked out. I don't know what the actual facts are, but there seems to be a lot of women borrowers in there. Are they actually financially literate, and do they know? But one thing though we've been seeing is that women borrowers are better payers, so they are meeting their obligations in time. Financial literacy absolutely needs to be encouraged at all levels, particularly women. There are certain programs that the SCCP has introduced. I think TV ads and communication with people is important. Agent banking is important, because agents are able to help them and communicate with them. Banks also using their platforms to educate the public at large and also women. And last but not the least, a lot of banks and microfinance institutions have got products only for women. The NISA program of HBL, the women program of Bank Al Habib, UBL also has a program. But there's also central requirement. I think there is a link between institutions these computer drawing on graduates from there. Look, I'll tell you, many years ago, India started with World Bank funding. They started an institution that trained people on writing software. And these are basic training institutions. It expanded all across India. One of the guys who came on board as chief executive suddenly realized that, hey, I have a whole pool of people who can write programs. Today, you have giants in India which are writing software. We have us to be able to train them and linkages with industry, because programmers, companies, software developers abroad are looking for cheap alternatives. Academia has to play a huge role developing such institutions, and I think academia has a huge role also in developing linkages with industry abroad. That's all I really know about that. I'm not an expert on fintech, but I do think it's got a great future in the country.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. We are on behalf of Dr. Nadeem, he just got disconnected. On behalf of him and the PIDE, we thank you so much for your participation in this webinar. We are indeed immensely grateful because there was a lot of learning new things, especially from the perspective of capital markets extending to other financial institutions. We will look forward to your participation in future as well. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.